Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome prosthetics designer Vincent Van Dyke, who joins us to talk about their work on Spider-Noir. Vincent will talk us through his process in creating the prosthetics and how he brought them to life on the show. Please be warned that there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Vincent. Hi, Vincent. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Robert. I appreciate it.
We're here to talk about Spider-Noir. That's just come out recently on Amazon Video. How have you found the reception to the show?
It's been great. It's been overwhelming, actually. I've been loving seeing the attention that it's gotten, particularly in black and white. I mean, I love old Turner Classic film, and it's honestly what plays in our household pretty much every night is black and white. Specifically, I love noir. So when this came about, it was super exciting, and the fact that people are actually watching it in black and white and enjoying it, kind of just tickles me in the right way also because I'm just a fan of that.
I think it's amazing one, I'm amazed that they're allowed to have been able to do this in black and
Yeah.
white. Granted, I know there's also the color version, and even the color version looks incredible as well. I think somehow managed to nail it in both ways. And I have to say as well, like your work on the show is absolutely nightmare fuel.
Thank you.
Which is like, again, complimentary, but also just like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to sleep after seeing, Man Spider in Spider-Noir. But before we sort of get to that sort of nitty gritty of it, how did the project come about and what made you want to take it on?
Yeah, the department head Lana of makeup, she reached out, and me and Lana had just worked on a project prior, and so we were new to even working together. But she wanted to bring me along for the ride on this, and so I had very early discussions with production and the showrunner, and it's funny right off the bat for me. It actually didn't necessarily feel like a good fit because I am not a comic book fan. I am not very knowledgeable of the superhero world, and it's not necessarily even something that interests me. And in my early discussions with Oren, he was like, "Yeah, that's actually exactly what we want. We want somebody who doesn't really know that and isn't going to bring any kind of bias to it. That you're just kind of coming at it from a fresh perspective." And he goes, "I actually really like that." So what sold me on it was the idea that one, the black and white and the noir of it all really did speak to me because I do love that. But the thing that really got me was the fact that they were so interested in keeping things kind of based in reality and very gritty and real. And so that's where I was able to have that realization of, okay, the work that we do and what I feel that myself and my company is known for in terms of bringing that to a project that we fit in really well, and that was exciting that we could collaborate in that way and actually realize some of these characters in such a way that is believable, so that it's not necessarily taking you out of story, but you can understand that these almost feel like ailments, as opposed to really wild stuff that is just unbelievable. And so that's really where we started, and I was so jazzed with that kind of ideology of character development.
I think as a show, like it subverts the expectation of like what a superhero can be, and I think it does follow the human element, and also kind of means like what does it mean to get old? Because speaking to another crew member, that Eric, the editor, about how like Spider-Man's predominantly like a younger kid character finding his feet in the world, whilst he is slightly different. And what does it feel like to have a bender the night before when you wake
Yeah,
up? Yeah,
yeah.
it's probably not a great feeling as you get older.
Yeah, that's just that reality that we were just speaking of, right? It's bringing this sense of something that is more day to day and real than everything being so polished and so kind of perfect. And so I love that. I love that it's highlighting some of those.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting from your answer as well is like you're saying that you're not a big comic book fan, which I guess if somebody hears that, they're kind of thinking, oh, but like, why would you work on a comic book show? But then at the same time, you don't have, I don't know, say if you've read Spider-Man for the past 20 odd years or something, you mentioned as well, you'd have that bias. Then you could be like, well, this is how that spider's going to look. It's going to be, instead of, it could be like hairy because spiders have hair, and then we can add another leg here or do something like that here. And but instead, you can kind of just throw something like a different idea at it and actually come at it in a different manner,
That's
which
right.
is, I guess, as a showrunner as well, it's like there's probably a risk of like, hopefully this comes off, but then it's like that risk, like it feels like the risk is the risk is high, but so is the reward from it.
I think so. And I think that you really nailed something about the way that I work that I don't really reveal all that often, but I tend to really like to kind of be in the dark on a lot before I have a conversation with creatives. And I do this really purposefully. In fact, like sometimes before I even take a meeting, I'll have a script sent to me and I won't read it because I like the idea of coming into something in a really fresh way where everything is being explained to me from the perspective of somebody who has created it. I have no bias. I have no preconceived idea of what something should be or what they should look like, or I'm just a fresh palette for them to kind of unload their story on and their vision. And I think that when it happens that way, for me at least, in the way that I work and the way that my creative brain kind of processes, it helps me develop something in a very unique way, as opposed to really kind of marinating on something and building this up in my head from reading it. So much like the analogy of I haven't read a comic book and I'm going into something blindly. I often find that I do that with scripts in general, and that I go into things blindly often because I do think that it helps us create something straight from the horse's mouth in a way that is very different than me having any bias at all. So yeah, it's I hadn't thought about it that way, but I tend to kind of work that way in general.
Well, one, I think like you revealed a really big part of like your process, because it feels like ego aside, you go in as a blank canvas. It's like, how can I get your whatever you have in your head onto paper and then into silicon, into whatever other like
Yeah,
material that you use as well, to what they have as an idea as well. And I feel like it was a very selfless way to work, because I can imagine, well, not imagine, I know that like there's a lot of egos in Hollywood, and
yes.
how people want to get things done and how they want ideas, but going in without like anything, one, that's really ballsy, but then two, it's like, you tell me how we can do this and I could let you know how we're going to work on it.
It's something that I've done for many years, and it just works for me. And sometimes it doesn't work for the other person. Sometimes I'm not the right fit because of that, but it does help me. And and after that, then when I read, once I've had that meeting, it helps actually frame my mindset in the right way. And so then I actually think that I'm digesting the material in the way that I'm supposed to. And again, this is very different than a lot of other people may work, but it really is something that I like to do. Anytime that I'm able to do that and have those meetings initially in that very blind way, I always go for it. I always think, and you're right, it is risky, and it is something that can sometimes be a daring choice to take. But I have found that it's been rewarding for me in the past.
Yeah, and I think if it's not broken, why fix it?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly.
and
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 again, like I said, if I'm not the right fit, I'm not the right fit. But hopefully, once we have that meeting and once we go through things and really talk about it, it becomes a very beautiful collaborative thing, or it
yeah,
can.
and but again, as you said, if it doesn't work, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's a very good way of just like not holding on to things or ideas. And then also, I feel like you're probably enriched a bit more. So when you come to your designing, to think of ideas or how you can possibly show how it's different on screen, because somebody like Sandman, for example, has already been on
Mm.
screen, so people already have an idea of how it's going to look. So if you had already sort of done your research and watched Sandman, it feels like your idea might be slightly tainted, because when you go on the Instagram of like the image that you posted,
Yeah.
of Jack Houston, like it looks insane. Like he does look incredible, but then also throughout the series, you see him partially with it, fully with it, and I'm sure VFX does play an element into the work as well, because
Of course,
it's
shifting and moving, and
yeah, exactly. So it's like, unless you actually did that in camera, which I'm sure somebody would, you would not tell me the secrets about it, because it would be like, the $1 million meal ticket. But at the same time, wow, imagine if you did. But even looking at it, it's just like, wow,
Oh, well,
amazing.
thanks, man. It was cool because there's not really ever a moment where he's going through some of those stages where he doesn't have some form of pieces on, and then that really allows the VFX team to be able to take bits and pieces of that and kind of move it around and morph it into what it needs to be. But I really love the way that Oren described this in the very beginning, because it spoke to me perfectly. It essentially was, think about this as a skin disease or disorder. Think of it as psoriasis. Think of it as something that is ever changing, moving, can be affected by stress or anger or sadness and depression. Think about how this is something that he lives with, and he's kind of, it's an ailment, and he is struggling through it, and he doesn't really have great control over it. And I loved getting into that headspace, because it just really allowed me to bring that realism to a place that was logical. I can take that and go, oh yeah, I believe that makes sense. I buy it. And then how do I make that feel as though that at the very end of it, that he's so overcome with this that he literally feels as though that he's got, sand for skin. And that is the way that we approached it in our design, and the way that we created the prosthetic pieces, which essentially was sculpting a likeness of Jack on top of Jack, but with the appropriate texture, and trying to maintain that it still felt and looked like him, with this new skin, which meant that every square inch of his flesh needed to be covered. I mean, his ears have prosthetic pieces. The back of his neck has prosthetic pieces. He's a total of 10 prosthetic overlapping pieces, if I remember correctly, with full gloves. And so it's a lot. It's a pretty big transformation just to get the right texture of skin. But there's really no other way to do it and not achieve that.
When you have something like that, how do you get an actor on board with the idea of how much prosthetics they'll be wearing and how much is going to transform them? Because in a way, like, I can imagine people being slightly scared because you're putting something over them,
Yeah.
and I don't know, they could be allergic to something, or it could be something that's like might induce maybe a panic attack. But how do you get an actor on board and sort of ease them into the process?
Tricky, because I think that the easy answer to your question is that you can't. I can't convince somebody of doing something that they already have a preconceived idea is going to be bad. So, unless I have an actor who's really into it and into the idea of transformation in that way, then it is challenging to collaborate. You have to have somebody who's open-minded enough to realize that this is going to help develop this character. It's not going to hinder it. And I think if you have that mindset, it's amazing. Now, sometimes I deal with actors who just haven't experienced that level of prosthetics. And sometimes that's actually better, because they have no preconceived idea of it. It's almost like me not reading the script in my first meeting. They're not tainted by anything. So they're open to whatever it may be. And I find that those are really moments of magic, because like Jack had not been in tremendous prosthetic makeup before. The idea of him looking at himself in the mirror during that very first test makeup, it was magic, because he was moving his face and doing little expressions and going outside to smoke a cigarette. And he was like, this is unfucking believable. He's like, I just come through in a way that I would have never imagined. And so I could see him get giddy with the idea and the possibilities of what this was bringing to it. And to me, that is the biggest, most beautiful compliment that I can receive as a prosthetic designer, is to have that moment with an actor where they realize that what I'm trying to do is open this character up into something that we're building together. I'm not trying to put my stamp on something and make your job difficult. I'm really trying to do this in a way that feels like me and you are working seamlessly together. And I'm just pushing something that you're developing in a way, and then you're grabbing this thing that I'm developing and running with it and making it look amazing. You're breathing life into a creation that otherwise would be, completely nothing. And so when that happens, there's nothing more magical than it. And I do believe that some of it really has to be the right person, the right headspace, and the right prosthetic designer all coming together to really make that. And so I'm very fortunate. I've worked with some really amazing people that are just game for full transformations, and they're not worried, they're not scared, they're not thinking about the bad things that could happen, because like you said, there are. I mean, people can get claustrophobic or feel limiting or feel like it's all just too much, and it's really just a conversation at that point. It's talking through and understanding where those fears are coming from or where they're being triggered by, and hopefully, knock on wood, we've had really good success with that. We've been able to really help an actor understand what our job is and what we're trying to do, and get to a great place in the end.
Yeah, and I think, well, we see it in the proofs in the pudding when you see the show, but even when you're looking at the pictures, because you were mentioning about when Jack's like moving, it's very expressive in the photos that you've posted, and it's kind of made me think a little bit like, how have you managed to allow him to move around like that at the same time, to be so expressive? Because effectively, his face is just sand. And I know sand moves a lot. It can also affects like water and if there's wind and whatnot. But like even looking at this, just a bit where I think it's the first photo where he's staring down the barrel of the lens, and you can see just above his eyebrow, like where the sand is cracking a bit. Hopefully, that's just the texture of it, not like something that he's breaking by mistake. But it just, yeah, even stuff like detail like that is incredible.
No, you're kind of touching upon something that I think is an interesting thing to explore in terms of what prosthetic design really is. And prosthetic design, I think a lot of people just think that, well, you concept something out and you make it look as cool as you can on paper or in the idea of what that sculpture is going to look like, and your job is done. But the job is so much more nuanced than that. I mean, you have to think about performance, and you have to think about the the anatomy of the person that you're doing this to. And so when we sculpt a prosthetic makeup, we're really, really cognizant of that person's anatomy, where their foundation is, and where their lines and expressive areas are. So when somebody comes in and we do scans of them, we also take extensive photographs of them going through ranges of expression. In fact, I usually make actors laugh because of the really ridiculous things I ask them to pull, where I go, I want you to look, unbelievably overjoyed. And they're like doing these big crazy faces, or, I want you to look really angry. And they're very exaggerated. But the reason why they're helpful for us is because I see where your absolute limit is. I see what your biggest smile is. I see what your biggest forehead raise is. I see what your biggest pout is. And so when we look at these, we're able to kind of determine the way that the face moves and where the areas of compression are and where they exist. And being able to take that and understand how those need to move with a prosthetic is just years and years of experience, and years of sculptural experience as well, of understanding that where we sculpt things tissue thin, and where we're able to sculpt something a little bit thicker, that is all part of the job of a prosthetic designer, to have that really vast amount of knowledge of just prior experience, to really know where you can get away with something, where you can push something. So yeah, you might have something that looks great on paper or on screen that you're presenting to somebody and go, yeah, what do you think of this? Is this great? And that's design, but it's not prosthetic design. Prosthetic design, then you translate that onto somebody in a way that is incredibly nuanced and incredibly complicated. And then it goes through a very technical process of how we break those prosthetic down into their individual elements. For example, what you're talking about with, the cracks and whatnot, it's all predetermined and it's all sculpted that way. The prosthetics that he's wearing are very, very, very soft silicone prosthetic pieces. So they're real mushy, gooey, encapsulated bits that just move with his face incredibly well. So nothing on it is actually, sand or hard material that would crack or break off. It's all just the illusion that it looks that way. Everything is actually incredibly, incredibly soft.
Wow, I think it's so. Just want to sort of go back to the point about where you're making the actors do different facial expressions. I think that's a really fascinating way of like looking behind the curtain, because in my mind I wouldn't think about that, but then you're thinking about what the limits are of when they're smiling, if they're looking sad, or different sort of ways that they might be portraying the character, or
Yeah.
even with Jack, with his way he smolders as well. Yeah, it's interesting as well to see like that. You need to think about just maybe how far their jaw might move, because if it moves by a couple of inches and you've done it wrong, you might you might see it. The camera might pick up a bit of non-prosthetic, and see their real face. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really really interesting. I'd never thought of it in that sort of way as well.
Yeah, it's everybody's face moves incredibly differently, and I think that that's, again, we all think like, well, you smile, you frown, but your face compresses in different ways, and so seeing where those areas really are different and unique on that individual, it really it's informative. It informs us on how to make the right decision.
Yes, and I think as well, like you probably think about, if they move in a certain way, then that it's gonna the prosthetic will move that way as well, and that even though
Yeah,
you're changing certain things as well.
that's
But
right.
then also as an actor, they could probably think of like actually, because they're getting into character, that they're going to have a certain look the whole time. So maybe they'll need to present that to you guys and see how that's going to work as well.
Well, and that's true, and there's something very interesting about that. Now that we've been doing scanning, something that I'll do on occasion is if an actor already really knows what they're bringing to that character and some of those kind of signature looks. You mentioned like the smoldering kind of vibe. If that's already something that they're playing with, and we're having those conversations, and I can tell that that's the direction that they're going, there's something really lovely about being able to scan them in that expression. And part of this is a little woo woo, where I just think it's kind of nice to be able to have somebody get into the headspace. Now, getting into the headspace is very subjective. Does that change the exterior of that person? And I'm a firm believer that it does. I think that you look at somebody after you've just paid them a compliment versus not, and their photograph of that person before and after, and they look different. Even if they're not smiling, there's something about them that's oozing a little bit of like a brightness of like, oh wow, I feel good right now. That same kind of psychology is true in character development. And I think that if you look at somebody who is playing the serial killer and they're getting in the mind of the serial killer versus just the photo of them when they're not, I promise you'll see the difference. And again, I don't mean overtly expression, but I just mean getting in the headspace, getting in that character, and like just changing the way that you're thinking. I think that there's something that really kind of oozes out of that performer, and I love that, and I love the fact that I think scanning is capturing that in a way that our traditional life casting never could. The subtlety of expression and essence in that moment when you're capturing it, I do believe is different. And so that's been an interesting thing to explore in the design process, is being able to scan somebody in character and then further develop that sculpture and that look as we kind of are collaborating together. But when I'm sculpting something and I've got that head of that person while they're in character versus just them neutral, not doing anything, I have to tell you, as a sculptor and as a creative, it's night and day, and it helps me bring my part of that job and process so much more easily. It just kind of comes so much more naturally when I've got something like that in front of me.
Do you find as well, maybe because like you've done this for so many years, you just mentioning that's like night and day. If you were to go back, I don't know, say 10 years, and you had to meet yourself in 10 years, like 10 years ago, to sort of explain the process of like how things change,
Yeah.
do you think that would probably blow 10 years younger Vincent's mind?
Yeah, it would, because 10 years ago, I would have never, ever thought that we were scanning and printing as much as we are. In fact, I'd had people ask me that question, and I said, I don't really have a lot of interest in it. And I don't think that it's something that is going to change my workflow all that much. And I couldn't have been more wrong. We now are printing something or scanning something on a daily basis here at my studio. So it absolutely has changed, and it's changing for the better. There are people that are still, I think, a little apprehensive or afraid to go down this path. And I can tell you right away, I haven't looked back once. The pros outweigh the cons so tremendously in how we develop the work that we do now, and being able to embrace and utilize the 3D technology, whether it be scanning or printing. It really is mind blowing. And so I think that 10 years ago, I would have a hard time understanding just how, until you actually do it and you go through it. I think that it almost feels so foreign that you can't picture it. But now I literally can't think of not having it and not being able to do it, which is true with so many things in life, right? Once you have it and you've done it for a few years, you don't know how you lived life without it. And it's very true with the technology that we're using today. I don't know how we did it without it.
Yeah, I guess in a way as well, like you don't look back from it, then yeah, you've just sort of embraced it and gone with it, and it makes things so much easier. There must be a way as well, like when you're looking at it. I don't know if you ever probably have moments where you're looking when you're scanning, just being like, man, I can't remember how we used to do this back in the day, and how long it probably would have taken, and how many more person hours it would have been just to, finish what we're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting in some ways. I mean, look, in some ways it feels like it was yesterday that we were still doing, live casting, and it still has its place. We still do live casting for a variety of different things. It's not like it's, dead tech. It's absolutely something that still holds a very valuable place in the toolbox. And also I'll say that I don't feel as though that the reasons behind what it is that we do now with the tech has streamlined us in a way that makes everything faster or more efficient. I don't think it's so much that. I think that it's working smarter, not harder, but it's not necessarily speeding everything up or removing jobs in the way that a lot of people think that it is. I think that it's just allowing us to work differently and more efficiently. And some things don't actually go faster. And in some ways, there are parts of the process that I actually think are longer in the way in which we do it now. That it was actually faster to do a life cast traditionally and build a positive and get that thing done really, really quickly. So it's funny. Again, I don't think when we look at the pros and the cons and we look at those two lists together and we talk about it, it's not like there's there's nothing in the cons list. There are cons to it. There are some things that I feel I miss about our older methods and ways of doing things, which is why I say that the others still hold a place in the toolbox. I think that the idea of abandoning anything and just going, all right, we're putting all of our eggs in this basket and that's it, is not the way to look at almost anything in terms of the way that we work or our workflow or how you embrace new tech. I think if you look at it as a tool and you look at it as a new element of something, and then as the jobs come up, you're figuring out the best way to handle it. That's the way that we try and approach it. We're not trying to say that there's just one way to do it and that's that. It's look at that toolbox and figure out which methodology is going to be best for that particular job.
Again, just interesting to get a look behind the curtain, especially with like prosthetic design. And the way things are done, and how you're mentioning that is more to aid your work rather than take jobs away as well, which I think is quite an important aspect to it all.
Well, and I think that to segue to something like Man Spider, that is embracing everything. I mean, there's so many different techniques that were used on that, and we definitely embraced the tech massively and did things in that job that we had never done before, and tested things that we had never seen done before. And that I feel like was one of the more exciting things that we have been a part of, certainly in my career. And there's a little bit of a roll of the dice, there's a little bit of a gamble with some of that. But I feel as though that if you have enough brilliant minds around you that are all thinking correctly and everyone is in communication with each other, your percentage of failure, continually diminishes. So I just try and build that team of brilliant minds around me as much as I possibly can, so that everyone is on the same page. I mean, for that job, we had a great sculptor and fellow prosthetic designer who works in France, Fred Linné, and he designed a lot of the stuff for Man Spider, and then also digitally sculpted a lot of it. So you got a guy that's in France while we're in Los Angeles, and we're zooming and talking, all the time, and he's digitally sculpting elements that we're then printing here in Los Angeles, and figuring out how we're going to have these legs with ball socket joints fit into a silicone, abdominal piece, but yet I want to print the molds for the legs. And that was something that we had really explored very much, is printing negatives for silicone to be injected into with printed cores. And so we ended up designing these articulated spider legs in the computer in the right thicknesses that we wanted them to be, with floating ball socket joints that were all pinned in such a way where it was rigid when you dropped it into the mold and cast it. And once you had the silicone around it, you then took it like a crab leg almost, and you broke all the joints, and it freed little tiny supports that were inside of those joints so that you could have a free flowing ball socket inside of a silicone spider leg. That was wild. I mean, that was something that I had never personally seen before, and wanted to play with and explore here. And they worked brilliantly. I was so happy with the idea that, from concept and the idea all the way to final execution of having these articulated spider legs that were ball socket joints into this abdominal piece, all worked in the way that we had all collectively talked about it, between all the different departments here at my studio and Fred, of figuring it out and having it come together was really cool. That was a really fun moment.
I think yeah, I did mention it before. It's like nightmare fuel, but then once you just start looking at the spider legs, and once you mention about like breaking the joints in a way, you're just like, you know what, that makes sense to the character as well. That they're not fully formed. They're
Yeah.
still like transitioning in a way, but then also you never know, somebody might have broken their joints so they don't run away like a spider, and the whole sort of backstory you can create into that just one design.
Totally. Yeah, completely. And that's what's fun about that, is the idea that you're in this weird zone of still very fleshy, and I think that's what makes that so disturbing, is the idea that, we didn't go with something that was like an exoskeletal spider abdomen and legs that were merged with fleshy person. We opted to have everything be fleshy. We opted to have everything feel as though that there's skin over it, and it isn't fully that. I mean, the joints of a spider leg are very much kind of segmented, and you can see where they fit together. With this, it isn't, right. It's just a silicone skin that is naturally over the whole thing. So you have this very fleshy leg that is painted with a mix between kind of a humany flesh tone, along with some arachnid kind of patterning. But I love the idea that it all is still very fleshy. I think that's what makes that so disturbing.
Yeah, and I think it's like the mixture of just like half man, half spider, and don't know what you're going to get from someone. Of like, how are they going to do that? Yeah, as in, how are they going to transform?
Yeah.
I think as well, like, I think it's like in the animated series, you'd have when they turn into like a fully grown spider, and in a way, like it would look back at it. I know it's a cartoon, so for like kids, it's a little bit. You don't want to make it too scary, but it's also kind of like a silly idea. What's here? It's like, well, what's happening with people? What's going on? And then also adding in, like, when you look at the face with the eyes, the transformation there, and then the teeth as well. It's like, like, I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, it was a blast. It was such a fun one to, again, to go through. Every department here at my studio had such a huge hand in it, and that was lovely to be able to have that, because you often have things that are a little bit more limited, where it's not as involved. It doesn't tick the box for every single department to have some kind of a play in it, and this one did. I mean, there's not a single person in my studio that didn't have some kind of a hand in making that thing come to life.
Yeah, and again, once people see the photos on your Instagram, or even on Google, it's just no. Yeah, it's not for me. I think because we see it so quickly in the show,
Yeah.
and having that sort of aspect of it either being like black and white or color, I think even in black and white makes it even scarier. If you think about it, those big black eyes as well. Oof.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to see both, because there's a part of me that loves that one in color. I love seeing some of the fleshy bits of it. I don't think it quite hits the same way, but you're right. I think that it is almost more disturbing in black and white because of the fact that your mind is filling in the gaps of what things may be in color, and that can be sometimes more disturbing. But I do love the way that that particular creature reads in color.
Everything about it, though, just I love the face. I know we're talking about the body as well, the way that it connects, but it's just also the face of just like half changing, half not changing. How does it feel? And the lighting in the hospital as well, where it's just
Yeah.
yeah, it's incredible. But I think as well, like performance wise, yeah, that's interesting as well because you have to hide their legs in the bed and the way that they're going to be moving, and they, even though they have only short time on screen, it's still amazing what they can do.
Yeah, and it's funny too that the guy that I wanted for that we've worked with in the past, this amazing performer and has been in a lot of creature suit and prosthetic work, Dustin Sighthammer. He's 6 foot 7. We'll have to look up exactly what his height is, but he is a tall guy. And so it's kind of funny that I'm choosing somebody who's like ridiculously tall, but then we're like burying their legs, and his height is so not what we're after. But I love his physique and what he brings to a character. He's such a great performer, and he knows how to breathe life into complex, complicated prosthetic design work. And so I knew instantly he was who I wanted to utilize for this and play with. And ironically enough, it was funny actually. The production had reached out to him, and I don't even understand how that happens and how the world works that way. But he was somebody who they were looking at, and it was the person that I had already worked with in the past and had scans of, and we were ready to hit the ground running and just start that. I mean, as with everything with television, we have such limited time to make these things happen, and this was, you know, a film level, very complicated piece to figure out, and under the TV budget and schedule was tricky. And so having already had the scans and the work of knowing that we could jump in and grab those molds of Dustin and just kind of hit the ground running was super helpful.
Yeah, I think somebody must have known. Somebody must have said something or dropped that in, because if they knew that they couldn't save a bit of money with the scans and
Yeah.
molds and whatnot, so they couldn't get away with it. And I think I looked it up whilst you're talking. He's 6'8".
6'8". Yeah. See,
Yeah,
even taller than I said. Yeah.
yeah, which is again like insane. But then I wonder how big those molds must be then. Like if he's that tall.
Yeah. You know, he's a big dude. So yeah, everything does get larger as you go through that process.
Yeah, which is mental. But I'm curious to know about as well is like there's just a few more questions I have. What's the process like of applying the prosthetics onto actors? Because it's going to take a good few hours. I think sometimes you see stories where I think it's like Jim Carrey's in it for like The Grinch. He was in it for like 12 hours straight or something before stepping onto set. Maybe not as that long, but how do you and your team go about applying the prosthetics and making sure that it's not just the actor that's comfortable, but then also your team's being looked after, because their call time's going to be something ridiculous, and that they're also going to be working so hard to make sure that they make call as well.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's very few that are working the hours that a prosthetic makeup artist is working on set. I mean, even more so than the actor that's in it, because they're there prior to that to prep the prosthetic pieces and get everything prepared. So when they sit in the chair, they're ready to go. They're removing that prosthetic at the end of the day. And then usually they're doing more prep work at the end of that day and cleaning up as well. So they're usually, you know, the first in and the last out. Sometimes we have no choice. I mean, there are certain characters that it is what it is. And there are not a lot of smart ways to make things less. I mean, we do our best and we try and think of things in ways that can eliminate very lengthy time in the chair. What I would say that I try and do is I think about, more than anything, how many times does it work? Because I think that it's very easy to not only convince an actor, but to convince production that we're going to do something far more complicated and far more lengthy of an application if it only shoots a handful of times, because it's only 3 times. You know, are you okay with it taking 5 hours to apply? Great, because it's only 3 times. So your act only has to go through that 3 times. You only have to have those prosthetic makeup artists working those types of hours for those 3 times, but it is going to pay off in the end. You are going to have something that I promise you is really magnificent. And I think that if I can pitch it that way for those moments, it's helpful. Now, other times the conversation is, hey, this person's in it every single day. They're number one on the call sheet. We have to be smart about this, and they cannot be in the chair for 4 hours. And in those situations, the time in the chair does dictate design. And I kind of, I never want that to happen. I never want that to be the thing that's driving the design, but sometimes it is just a part of our job for all of the reasons that we just illustrated. Sometimes it is. And in those cases, we have to creatively come up with solutions that still give us what we're trying to achieve, both for story and creatives in general, to get that character portrayed properly, but do it in a way where they're in the chair for 2 hours, let's say. So in those moments, we are trying to do everything possible that we can to prep. Sometimes we do a lot of extensive pre-painting of the prosthetics so that when they go on, it's far less of a paint job when your actor's in the chair. Sometimes it's fewer pieces, so you're not putting on 10 individual prosthetics, but you're putting on 5 individual prosthetics. And so we have all of those things kind of running in the back of our mind as we're creating those looks. In terms of the application, whether it's 1 piece or it's 15, the process is quite similar. One of our main jobs is to make sure that we're treating the skin incredibly well, both in our prep work and at our end of day work, where we remove the prosthetics and now we're trying to hydrate and rejuvenate that skin so that it's a beautiful canvas for the next day. And I think a lot of actors probably aren't quite aware of the extent that prosthetic artists go to make sure that skin is maintained and healthy. Both for us and for them. We need a beautiful, healthy, clean canvas, and they need healthy skin for the next day also. So we really have become very, very in tune to the proper prep for skin prior to prosthetics going on. We use medical adhesives that have been around for a very long time that are very, very tested. I have not had, literally, knock on wood, anybody ever break out in anything from any of the glues or materials that we use. And it's also it's surgery. At the end of the day, it's such a very delicate process. We're not just slapping these things on and blasting you with color and getting you out the door. It's a dance, and you have these really delicate, soft silicone prosthetic pieces that you're putting on with tweezers and little brushes of glue, and everything has to very precisely fit within a millimeter of exactly where it's supposed to go. Your edges need to blend off, so seamlessly to their skin. The color match needs to be immaculate. You're working with hair, you're working with costumes, everybody's kind of dancing together in this moment to make sure that it's just seamlessly executed. And that process is like a surgery. It's this very delicate, very, very intensive time. And I think because of that, because of the nature of what it is, and because of how delicate it is, you see the art form come through in that. You see how everything comes together in that way, and how much the care is focused on not just the success of that makeup, but the preparation of the skin and whatnot. That it's grueling. It's a lot. I don't ever try and undersell it and make it feel like it's just a walk in the park, because it's not. It is a lot to go through before you start your day and actually go on set and start. Everything is all prep and in that application of those hours in the morning. But it can really be a beautiful thing and be a wonderful time to get in the right headspace.
I guess as well, like if you're there early in the morning, well, one, you beat the traffic, so it's all good. But then two, as you said, when you're prepping, it's like that you don't need, you have that sort of moments of silence whilst you're doing it. You're kind of getting a bit more meticulous because you know that you're going to start quite early on, and you know that you don't really need to talk to people, and you kind of just make sure that you're ready for when the cast member comes in and makes them comfortable as well. But I think you made a really interesting point as well, is like how you want to play it when you talk to production about if somebody's in for 5 days, then it's going to take we need to make sure that we can have to utilize that time. It's going to take a bit more time compared to maybe when you cast one, because of cast one you're going to be in that sort of rhythm and dance of trying to cut down the time. But
Yeah.
at the same time, as you're mentioning as well, as like the skin and how people are reacting to it and how they're going to breathe. That's another thing that I don't think people will think of, is just that even though it's like a layer of skin that people are wearing, it's also people are going to be sweating in it. They're going to be, you know, maybe spill water on themselves, or coffee from craft, who knows, or snacks and whatnot. And so then there's also the upkeep of that and making sure that whoever has the unfortunate job of cleaning that at the end of the day and looking after that and prepping it for when somebody comes in the next day as well. That's probably a big job.
It's a full-time job. I mean, my mentor Tom Berman used to say it brilliantly, as he said that doing prosthetic makeup is like doing watercolors in the rain. You're doing something that has a shelf life, and as you do it and as it goes throughout the day, it's constant upkeep. You're hyper fixated and focused on that monitor to go, oh, that's lifting, or that's a problem, or this is a bit too shiny and this is now a bit too matte, and you're making adjustments. It's when you've really got a full-on prosthetic like that, there's never a moment where that prosthetic makeup artist isn't doing something. It's pretty constant. It's like you are babysitting and watching out for everything, and everything can happen, and sometimes nothing happens. But it is that constant kind of monitoring that it takes a special kind of person to be able to achieve.
Yeah, and also when you're on set, that like even though you'll have your final checks are so different to say costume or even conventional hair and makeup, and because you don't really want to see something might peel off, for example, or just need to reapply it again. Yeah, it's fascinating, really, and just also like how much actually needs to be done for it, and make sure that people are, just are being able to do it and whatnot.
Completely, yeah. Our checks are for after lunch. After lunch touch-ups for us are usually much different than for any other cast. When we've got somebody that's got some heavy prosthetic makeup on, there's usually a little bit more repair, a little bit more touch-up around lips and mouth, and things of that nature after somebody's had a meal, and hopefully they've been conscious of it, and they haven't had a rack of ribs that they've been chewing on, and they've been kind to us. I've had both. I've had some that are wonderful, and they'll have a protein shake for lunch because they didn't want to disturb anything, and I'm like, oh, bless you for being so conscious of this. And then I literally have had others eat corn on the cob with butter, and you're just like, oh fuck, this is going to take some repair work.
What would possess you to eat corn on the cob when you're like that? Or even a rack of ribs, even at the best of times, like,
oh yeah, no, it's it happens. It happens.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe people actually do that. I shouldn't laugh because it probably, once you see it, it's probably an absolute pain in the backside.
It's not funny in the moment, but it's funny later for sure. Yeah, it's funny to look back on.
It's like, can you believe that person? I've got 2 more questions for you. So for my penultimate question, how does your work intertwine with like hair and makeup, and also with costume? Because there's, of course, that you're building, for example, Sandman. You're mentioning having gloves for his hands, and then also the back of his neck. But then I'm guessing you're not really putting anything more across his body, or you're not really want to get away with other departments' work as well.
So it is very much a dance between different departments, and making sure that everybody is kind of on the same page. I will say that with prosthetic work like this, we sometimes tend to be in our own little bubble. I mean, as close as I work with Lana, for example, and really talk about how we're approaching, the makeup specifically on this show. You have a character like Sandman, and he all of a sudden really becomes this thing that is just all encompassing prosthetic work, and where his normal mustache would normally be an element is a lace mustache on top of prosthetics. It's lace eyebrows on top of a forehead piece. So it's things to mimic what he normally is, on top of it. Our man Spider, even though that one side of his face looks kind of normal and human, and he has kind of normal hair on that side, he's fully covered in prosthetics on that side as well. So we did kind of like humanistic prosthetics on that side, and then colored them very realistically. And then it's a full custom lace wig. And in that case, it's like we tend to handle all of that. We tend to handle all of the hair work in-house here. And then we absolutely will work closely with the department heads and talk with, Teresa, for example, on the show and see where we need to kind of collaborate. But um, I find that sometimes the best success for the work that we do tends to be when it's all coming under the same roof. And it really is just due to the fact that we all can put eyes on it at the same time and we can kind of build it collectively together. And so when that happens and we're able to work in that way, I think that it helps for everything to puzzle piece together beautifully. With that being said, with costuming, talking to Tracy, for example, and saying, what is the palette of Sandman's suits going to be? Color wise, that's an important thing for us to kind of get on the same page with early on to make sure that we're doing things that complement one another. It was lovely to hear Guillermo del Toro talk about filmmaking in general recently in an interview about Frankenstein, and talking about how each department really is working together to create the bigger picture. That makeup is production design, and production design is costume, and costume is it's so true. And I think that the more that communication happens and the more that everybody is on the same page collectively, even if it's palette of color alone, I think it changes the way that we all absorb viewing something. And so it's great. It's great when you can have that collaboration and really make sure that everybody is speaking the same language and that it all works really well together, and that it's cohesive.
I think as well, like if somebody starts earlier than another department, then they kind of have to jump on you guys a bit, because they might have something already chosen. So then whatever you might have had in mind changes as well a little bit.
Completely, and that's true in terms of informing us as well. I mean, VFX was on this project far before I was, and so being able to talk to them about certain things and have them inform me on things and get me up to speed is incredibly helpful. So you're absolutely right in that sense as well. Is that some people have been on something, or a costume designer may have been on something for longer, and then when we're brought in, it's really lovely to be able to kind of do that, especially if you've worked with them before and you've got that shorthand and you can very quickly get up to speed.
Yeah, and if you've worked with people before, mentioning shorthand, it's probably just literally just like, do you have this? Yep. Do you have that? Yep. Cool. I'll see you later. Nice and easy. See you in a few weeks' time.
Sometimes it is, yeah. Sometimes it's very little. Sometimes it's incredibly intensive, and you're collaborating in a way that is very different. But yeah, I think you're right. Most of the time, when everyone's doing their job really well and they're all executing these things on high level, sometimes those conversations are just very quick. It's just, you're doing what you need to do. We're doing what we need to do. I understand what you've got going on. You understand what I've got going on. Great. Break. We'll all see each other on the day, and it'll go as it goes.
Yeah, and will be perfect. Just to wrap up this episode, do you have a question for me, or is there anything else that you want to mention that I might have missed in my questions?
No, I mean, God, I feel like we covered a lot of great stuff. I mean, so much of this show for me was the tech of it all, and kind of embracing some of the new things that we've developed in the last 5 years or so at my studio. And Man Spider was a great example of that. The only other thing I'd love to chat a little bit about would be some of the creatures in the tanks that we did for, I think they're episode 6 that you see them, and they're kind of failed attempts at different iterations of splicing and merging different insects with human, and we were able to kind of design and develop quite a few of them. I think we did 5 in total, and they were some of the most fun that I've had on a job in a very long time. And you see them very briefly, and they're inside of these really gorgeous tanks that the art department built, that were really lovely. They were all scratch built for this. And talk about communicating with departments, making sure that they're building something around the parameters of what we've done. And because we designed and sculpted these characters digitally, we were able to share those with their concept people and make sure that they were kind of creating these tanks to fit around them, and make sure that they were framed properly, so that where you saw the face, for example, in between brackets or details were appropriate. But they were really fun. It was such a great place to explore merging anatomy with different things. Taking elements of shark and fish and merging them with a man. One of my favorites was a praying mantis that was merged, and so we did these really beautiful kind of like the praying mantis arms that were kind of folded in front of him, and his head is kind of tilted back, and they're just really elegant. They actually remind me of Renaissance sculpture in the way that they're kind of posed, and there's something incredibly empathetic about each one of them where they've got kind of a pained feel. And so I haven't shared images of that stuff yet. I plan on in the next coming weeks sharing all of those, because they're, like I said, they're some of my most favorite things we've done. And because of the short turnaround time and again the fast-paced world of television, we actually did them completely digital and printed them full scale. So they're life-size, full-body prints that were printed in a translucent resin, and then we hand-painted, airbrushed, and hand-painted head to toe these in really fun, elaborate paint jobs. But that was the only thing we actually physically did to them. Everything else was a digital workflow, and so I was really proud of that as well. I thought it was a great exploration of that technology, and doing something that didn't actually need to be soft silicone, but could be the print itself that lived within that tank, and get done in that, again, in the time and budgetary constraints for a show. And I was quite pleased with the way those came out.
I think it's interesting. It's like, I thought that was an art department thing, production design thing. I didn't realize it'd be you guys as well. Didn't really cross my mind until you mentioned it now. But yeah, again, nightmare fuel or some of that stuff. The praying mantis, no, like that reminds me. I don't know if you ever seen Ants. I think it's a DreamWorks film on like
yeah,
nearly 20 plus years, and I think the praying mantis is in that, or like something like that. And it's like no,
ah,
and that's what it
that's
reminded me a
funny.
little bit of.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, that's a great callback. Yeah, and you're right to say that. I mean, sometimes it's funny where makeup effects and prosthetics cross over to different departments. I mean, we have been involved in like wardrobe suit construction in a way that you would not think we're involved in creating materials um and details for costuming for particular characters, far more than you would think a prosthetic company would be. And also in terms of props themselves. I mean, we really do things from soup to nuts here at the studio. So productions can lean on us as heavily as they want or as little. And until they really know everything that we do, sometimes our jobs are quite limited. But it's funny that when all departments actually know what we're capable of, or if there's a prop master that we've worked with in the past, and a costume designer that we've worked with in the past, and production designer that we've worked with in the past, when they all kind of collectively know what my studio is capable of, then I find that that's where they'll lean on us more, because they realize where, again, when everything comes from the same house, I think that we get a continuity in work and style that is unmatched. And for a show like this, where you are able to achieve that, and those creatures feel as though that they fit within the world of Man Spider or Sandman, or it just becomes like, it doesn't take you out of story. It doesn't feel out of place. And I think that that's a testament to being able to have some of the same hands involved in the same work in that way. And so when those other departments are able to lean on us and we're able to kind of lend our talents, it's something that I love very much. It's a great place for us to kind of explore and spread our wings, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%, and also the fact that you have that continuity once everybody, once they know that you can do a number of things under the roof. It's like, why do I need to then make sure that I need to explain to another company how to do it and send
Exactly.
over the sort of look and feel, whilst it's like they already get it. Let's just get on with
Exactly.
it, and it doesn't delay how we want things to be moving. And then you also trust them as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Vincent, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Spider-Noir is streaming now on Amazon Video. Go out and watch Vincent and his amazing team's work. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
You take care, and bye-bye now.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.